Hello! I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours. And I am not going to tell you the stories that I tell on my tour, because you gotta pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you. So a couple of years ago, right before hurricane season, a meme went around the New Orleans Facebook communities that was presented as a warning. And it said something to the extent of, "We are now entering expert level New Orleans. If you do not know how to cook water, uh, storm prep shop, and like two other things, you need to leave." And ever since then, I've thought of certain things as expert level New Orleans. And yes, some of them are storm related. There was one night I had guests the night before Hurricane Ida struck. Most of the city is evacuating, and I am sitting there leading a tour. And I mean, I don't mind, I need the money, and like, the night before storms tends to be very quiet, so I'm perfectly fine with it. And in the end, I turned out to be very correct to do that tour because it was another 2 weeks before I got a single other tour. But I was doing that tour that night, and these poor guests, God bless them, they had no idea that a storm, like, what was really happening. Like, yeah, they knew a storm was hitting, and hilariously, they were from, I think it was New Jersey, and they were talking about, like, "Oh, well, we know what hurricanes are like. We sat through Hurricane Sandy," and I'm sitting here like, okay, yeah, I know that was a big storm. I know that one caused a lot of damage. I mean, I was in the area at that time. I lived in New Hampshire at the time, but I don't think you realize what's happening here. And like a couple times we walked by buildings that had, plywood over the windows and sandbags out front, and they're like, "Why are all the shops closed?" And I'm like, "The hurricane?" And like, "Yeah, but the storm's not hitting yet." And I'm like, "Yeah, but the people who run the shops have evacuated." And they're like, "Oh." But I never quite got it through their heads that maybe it's not a good idea to still be in New Orleans until the very last stop. And the very last stop on that tour happens to be less than a block away from one of the evacuation pickup points. And just half jokingly and half seriously, because I knew they were staying in the French Quarter and their plan was to drive out at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, and Ida was hitting significantly earlier than that, I sort of half jokingly and half seriously, when the tour was over, said, "Okay, and in case y'all need to know, just as a just in case moment, the evacuation point is right there. So if you need it, it's there." And I watched this woman's face go white when she suddenly realized that maybe, just maybe, she shouldn't be there. But I don't know what happened to them. I hope they made it out, because if they did not choose to leave before the storm struck, yeah, they probably weren't leaving for at least a week. But there are other forms of expert level New Orleans. There was a summer that just like, God, there were so many shootings that summer. That was not a good summer. And like most of the violent crime in New Orleans, it did not happen in the tourist neighborhoods usually. That summer, no, there were like 5 shootings on Bourbon Street. And there was one night in particular I remember very clearly because I was doing the true crime tour. And that's the only tour that I have people walking around going like, "Oh my God, is it safe for me to be in the city of New Orleans?" And I had this nice older couple come up after the tour and yeah, ask me, "Is it safe for us to walk around New Orleans?" And I did the thing that I always did on that tour, which was, "It's fine. Just use your common sense. You're in a big city, so act like you're in a big city. Don't take random strangers home with you. Use your common sense." And like one of the things I tagged on at that point was, "And stay in the tourist areas. Like violent crime doesn't tend to happen in the area that tourists are because it's very bad for business. So stay on Bourbon Street and Royal Street and areas like that." And less than 2 hours later, there was a shooting on Bourbon Street where like 3 people went to the hospital, and I'm sitting here like, oops. But yeah, that's another form of expert level New Orleans. But I would also consider festival weekends, the week of Mardi Gras itself, like Fat Tuesday, those are also expert level New Orleans. You just need to know what you're doing, because otherwise You may not get anywhere the entire time. I mean, it's New Orleans. This is a city where grocery stores shut down for Mardi Gras. Like, you sort of gotta know what you're doing. But overall, one of the jokes that I used to say was if you wanted, like, if you needed to know whether or not it was safe to be in New Orleans, there are a couple things you can look at. Like, across the South, if you're visiting an area, one of the things to look at is Waffle House open? If Waffle House closes, probably the storm's big enough you need to be out of town. And in the French Quarter, that was always Café du Monde. But the problem is, Café du Monde started closing every night during the COVID era and is still closing every night between like 8 and 10 p.m. So we can no longer use that as the like just metric of like, is Café du Monde open? No? Get your butt out of town. So, I'm not sure what the expert level New Orleans metric is anymore. I guess just ask locals? And if they laugh, leave. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to share your own experiences in the comments below.